Well, good evening. I too want to thank the Greater Vancouver Homebuilders Association for inviting me to speak. This is the first time I've spoken at this particular event. I started as a baby lawyer in my firm, articling there about 15 years ago, and we did quite a bit of work and had some interaction with the GVHBA. I can tell you that they are really good people, and we do a lot of work for the builders that are part of the association as well, and they're good people too. So if you're working with someone from the GVHBA, you're in good hands. Now you're probably wondering, what can a lawyer say in 10 minutes? Not an awful lot. I want to just thank GVHBA for asking me to speak. I usually get invited to be on people's charities boards. They don't always ask me to speak in public. So I appreciate them asking me. There's our mission statement for my firm, but we'll get on to the other stuff. So when you're buying a house, I'm going to talk a little bit more from the standpoint of you being a first-time buyer. But this happens for anybody that's purchasing a house. You're either going to use a notary or a lawyer. Of course, I'm going to recommend you use a lawyer. But you're going to use a lawyer to do the transactional registrations, deal with your mortgage and that sort of thing. So what will your lawyer do for you? Some of you that have bought a house, you probably forgot actually what lawyers do. And if you've never bought a house, never had a lawyer help you, these are just some of the things that a lawyer would do for you. So they're going to review the contract of purchase and sale. So chances are you've been with people like Darcy, who has recommended working closely with a good realtor. Typically, I get clients who come to me, they've already got a contract, they've removed subjects, it's a binding contract. Don't come to me and ask me how you're going to get out of it because you're in a binding contract. So normally by the time I get people in my office, they have a contract. So the lawyer's going to review it. Sometimes there's funny little things hiding in it. And people forget that, oh yeah, I agreed to do this, or the seller agreed to do that. We look and try and figure out what those things are just to make sure that it doesn't surprise anybody at the last minute. We're going to search the title on the property that you're buying just to make sure that we know what things the seller has to remove from their title. Usually there's a mortgage on there, not all the time. There may be some other things, and the seller has to get rid of all of the financial charges. It's our job as lawyers to make sure that we know what those charges are and to make sure that they are going to come off title at the end. We will explain to you the effect of any charges and restrictions that might remain on the title, so things like statutory rights of ways, covenants, building schemes, those kinds of things that might remain on the title. They may have been there for years and they're going to be there long after we're gone. We'll explain those, but you sometimes have to remember to ask. I assume that when you've gone through the process with a realtor, they have to do a component in their real estate licensing on the law. So I assume that your realtor has probably explained some of those things to you. If you've already removed subjects on something where there's a building scheme, I hope you know what that is because I get the odd phone call from a person who didn't know that there was a certain restriction in a building scheme and they wanted to put a type of a roof on and they're not allowed to. So anyway, remember to ask your lawyer if those things are important to you. The lawyers will prepare and register all the documents that are required to transfer the property from the seller into your name, and that would include putting a mortgage on from RBC or any of the other lenders that are out there. We also manage the relationship with the seller's lawyer. That may not be all that necessary in a residential real estate contract, but if for some reason some acrimony springs up, it's something that's probably important. Typically, it doesn't happen in residential sales, though. And then we ensure that you receive clear title to the property. So as I said before, seller's responsibility is to make sure that you get all the financial charges taken off of the property, and it's the lawyer's job to make sure that that happens. So as a first-time buyer and maybe somebody who's buying again, you may not remember all of the things that you might have to pay for. So costs associated with purchasing a home, it depends on a number of factors, including how complex the transaction might be. In a typical residential purchase and sale, not going to be that complex, but you never know. Some people trade a BMW as their down payment. Little things like that happen. Yeah, it's true. Whether there's a mortgage involved or not, believe it or not, some people buy all cash. Those are really easy deals. Some people don't have a mortgage on their property, so those are easy to clear title as well. And the level of service that's offered or requested of your lawyer, that just goes back to the last slide a little bit. Closing costs for a first-time home buyer. I've heard it estimated that a first-time buyer might want to set aside about 1% of the purchase price for closing costs. Personally, in my practice, that would seem a little bit high, but it really just depends a little bit on the cost of the home that you're buying. So some of the costs that will be included with your lawyer are going to be land title registration costs. If you're buying a strata title property, there's some forms that we need to get as lawyers from the strata corporation, the management company, in order to transfer the title. There's always going to be an adjustment of current year's municipal taxes, so your property taxes have to be adjusted. Sometimes there's a property survey if it's a newer home. Most banks these days are requiring something called title insurance. That's not typically included in a lawyer's fee. Title insurance can range from $100 to $1,000 depending. A lot of times it depends on the size of your mortgage. So the bigger your mortgage, the more that's going to be. And also the legal fees would be included in your closing costs. For first-time home buyers, what kinds of subject clauses or conditions would you put in a contract? It's going to depend a little bit on the property that you're buying, but typical ones, the four main ones that we would see would be that it would be subject to financing. So you go and see your fine people at RBC, and hopefully you're pre-approved, but just because you're pre-approved, you're going to want to go back and make sure that you actually are finally approved before you want to remove that financing subject. A home inspection is a great idea. It always amazes me when I watch Fixer Upper on TV, how many times they get into these fixer-uppers and they realize that the foundation's all cracked up, and I'm thinking, well, didn't you do a property inspection beforehand? So a good idea to do that. A lot of times it comes back clear, but at least the few $100s you spend on a home inspector is going to let you sleep at night. If you're buying a strata property, you're going to want to review strata minutes. So I would put that in there. Typically, you're going to do that with your realtor. Realtor can usually order those for you and review them with you. And sometimes you might want to have review of a title search where you're going to go to your lawyer and get your lawyer to look at the title search just to see if there's anything strange on there. If you are purchasing a home privately, and this happens occasionally with us, clients will call us, they've got somebody that wants to sell them a house and they want their lawyer to draft the contract. No problem, we're happy to do that. But that would be an extra cost for drafting the contract over and above the regular cost that you would pay to your lawyer. If you're buying a new home that's under construction, just be a little bit flexible. They're not wrapped up in 30 minutes like you see on A&E or HGTV, I guess it is. So just give yourself a little bit of flexibility. If you're renting something, it might take you a couple extra months, depending on weather and things like that. And make sure that you can fulfill all of your obligations that are set out in your contract to make sure that you can actually complete when the builder says, okay, now we need our final payment. Don't be surprised. I just want to mention a couple of little things about property transfer tax in the end. Maybe it's not as relevant in Vancouver. My practice is primarily in the Fraser Valley, but as you might know, first-time home buyers have a property transfer tax exemption if they're buying up to $475,000. So I do see a little bit of that. Not everybody is buying in that range, but believe it or not, there are properties you can buy under $475,000 in the Vancouver area. And this was a new one that came out just a few weeks ago. The provincial government said they are increasing the property transfer tax exemption. If you're buying a brand new home up to $750,000, it's property transfer tax exempt. And they added a new little gem in there. So if for any property that's over $2 million, you're paying an extra 1% transfer tax on anything over and above the $2 million price tag. But that's something, just to add a little bit, if you are taking advantage of the first-time home buyers transfer tax exemption, there's a few different requirements you have to live up to. One is you can't have owned property anywhere in the world before this time, and you have to live in that property for at least a year before you resell it. Otherwise, they can come back to you. And the transfer tax office is, well, they're tax people. They're pretty serious about their job. They will come after you if you sell your property. I've seen it happen. So anyway, just a little story. A client of mine one time, husband and wife, she had owned a condo before, so she wasn't eligible. He thought he was eligible for the first-time home buyer's exemption, and we claimed it, but he had actually bought a $20,000 concrete pad to put their travel trailer on in the States. And the transfer tax office knew about it because you have to give them their social insurance number, and they denied him his transfer tax exemption because of that. So, and he didn't even think it was relevant. He thought it was in the States, and it was a recreational thing, not a home, wasn't a primary residence. So little things like that just to keep in mind. So there you go. That's what a lawyer can do for you in 10 minutes. Hopefully I touched on something that was relevant and interesting to you. So thank you very much.